Let's talk about how we're still voting in one day in Nigeria. What do I mean? On our presidential election in 2027, that election will hold on Saturday, the 16th day of January 2027. Typically, our elections here start at 8 in the morning and will end about 4 p.m. in the evening, because at every polling unit, the figures will be collated, forms will be signed from EC8, all the party agents will sign to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to the figures that have been collated, and then they will be sent onwards. I think it moves from the polling unit to the ward, and then from the ward to the state, and from the state to the federal. That's the trajectory. But why am I talking about voting in one day today? Let me give you the figures from 2023. In the 2023 presidential elections here in Nigeria, the total number of valid votes was 24,025,940 votes. That's 24,025,940. 24 million total valid votes cast. Now, the breakdown of that 2023 figure of 24 million votes is as follows. The APC and Bola Tinubu scored 8,794,726 votes. Peter Obi of the Labour Party scored 6,101,533 votes. ATIKU Abubakar scored 6,984,520 votes. And coming in fourth was Rabiu Kwankwaso, former governor of Kano State. He scored 1,496,687 votes. Now, the total of those four men in 2023 was 23,377,466 votes. That came to 97.3% of the total votes cast. Don't forget, I said earlier on that the total votes cast was just over 24,025,940 votes. So that was 97.3% of the total votes cast. Now, there was another 648,474 votes, which amounted to about 2.7% of the votes cast in 2023. Now, that figure of 648,000 votes were shared among the smaller parties that existed. You know, there were the top big four parties. That's NNPP, Kwankwaso's party, APC, PDP, and the Labour Party. Now, these other parties, the AAC, the AA, Zenith Labour Party, and the APM, all such other smaller parties had different vote numbers as well. Charles Nadi had 12,000 votes. Al-Mustafa Hamza, remember him from the Abacha days? He had 14,542 votes. Omoyele Sowore of the AAC had 14,608 votes. There's a lady here, Princess Ojeyi. She scored 25,961 votes. We have Imumolen Irene. I'm not sure if that's a man or a woman, but that person also scored 61,014 votes. And of course, we had Peter Umeadi, who the highest scorer of these other parties, 61,966 votes. Now, why am I giving you all these figures? I'm giving you all these figures because I'm trying to make a case for us to, include more days in our voting. Instead of voting just on Saturday, why can't we vote on 3 days: Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'll explain why. Just bear with me here. For years, voting on Saturday has always upset members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. As you know, members of the Seventh-day Adventist, they go to their service, their worship on Saturdays, and they've always felt disenfranchised, from elections. So I proposed that if we vote Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every religious group will be affected. So on Fridays, when the Muslims go to the mosque for, their prayers, the Friday prayers, they will be excused from voting. They don't have to vote on Friday. They can now decide to vote on Saturday and Sunday. Seventh-day Adventist members or those whose worship is on Saturdays can opt to vote on Friday and on Sunday. And then those who go to church on Sundays, like the Catholics and the Christians, can vote on Fridays and Saturdays. Why am I calling for us to vote for 3 days? The truth is, a registered number of voters, the total number of registered voters in Nigeria is 93,469,008 votes. That's 93 million, just about 93.5 million registered voters in Nigeria. Isn't it a shame that of 93 million registered voters, only 24 million people elect the president? In fact, the president wasn't elected by 24 million people. The president was elected by 8.7 million people. 24 million people managed to vote between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. on a Saturday. 24 million people managed to vote in 8 hours. That's from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The president of a country with a population of 225 million people is elected by 8.7 million people. What kind of mandate is that? Can the president truly say he has the mandate of the people? With 8.7 million votes, 93 million registered voters, a population of 225 million people, can you really say that the mandate you have is strong with 8.5 million people? It's obvious. Voting in one day isn't sufficient. And let me break it down for you. The election is from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's 8 hours. So let's say from 8 to 12 noon, that's 4 hours. 12 noon to 4 p.m., that's another 4 hours. On the average, every voter at the polling unit averages about 10 to 15 minutes to complete the process of voting. So when you get to your polling unit, it will take, even if they're very efficient, let's imagine they're very efficient. So the beavers machine is working, everything is moving, tick-tock, flowing, there's no rain, no flood, the voting materials got there on time, and then 8 on the dot, all the party agents are there, all the INEC personnel are there, all the observers are there, boom, 8 o'clock, we start the voting, and then as fast as they are, we're still averaging 10 minutes per voter. What does that tell you? Even if there are 3 voting points, it means that in 1 hour, at 10 minutes per voter, only 6 people can vote in 1 hour. So let's imagine this is my polling unit, and we have 2 or 3 beavers machines helping the process. So 10 minutes, you vote, then, every 1 hour, you're doing like 6 people. That's why when you see at the end of the day, when they are announcing the results from the polling units, they always sound very poor. Some polling units in 196 people, some 200, some don't even get up to 100. That is valid votes. We're not counting votes that, will be, cancelled because the thumbprint didn't stay within the lines. It was, bastardized and all that. So the valid votes are always so small. And the reason is because there's not enough time for everyone to vote. Let's compare it with the figures from America. The last election, 2024, November 5th, 2024, that election was between Donald J. Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, the popular vote, Trump was elected. They have the electoral college system, but I want to go with the raw figures of the popular vote. Trump scored 77,302,580 votes. I repeat that, 77,302,580 votes. That's 49.8% of the votes cast. While former Vice President Kamala Harris scored 75,017,613 votes. Imagine that. Kamala Harris lost the election with 75,017,613 votes. 75 million lost the election. But let's compare the figures. Number of registered voters in America is 173,850,000. That's 174 million registered voters. 174 million registered voters. If you add what Trump scored, 77 million, and add what Kamala Harris scored, 75 million, you have total number of votes cast for those two candidates standing at 152 million votes. 152 million people were able to vote out of 173 million registered voters. Now, that's saying it. With a 77 million vote tally, you know that you really have the mandate. There's no doubt in my mind that you have the mandate. As opposed to 8.7 million votes of 93 million registered voters. This message is for the Independent National Electoral Commission and, of course, for Mr. President. We need to examine how we can increase the number of dates on which we vote. One day is obviously not enough. The most number of votes we've seen here in Nigeria is Buhari winning with 15 million votes. That's still poor. 15 million votes from 93 potential registered voters. It is still poor. It is still very poor. How can a president in a country with 93 million registered voters be elected with 8.7? Voting in one day is not enough. It is not working. It is not a solid enough mandate. That is why you see some Nigerians saying, Tinubu is not my president. They're justified in saying that. He got less than 10% of the total number of registered voters. The total number of registered voters is 93469,008. The president did not score 9.3 million votes to win that election. We may not be able to do it in 2027, but we definitely need to consider increasing the number of days on which we vote. Yes, America was able to garner 152 plus million votes altogether. But don't forget, they have early voting. They have mail-in voting. So their voting is not just going physically. You can vote through the mail, and then you have a month or so, I'm sure it's even more than a month, before the actual voting day, the election day. There's a month-long voting process already going on. So not everybody is waiting until election day to go and vote. This is very, very important, and it's something we really need to consider. For the president to be very confident and sure of the mandate he's given from the Nigerian people, we have to up the figures that win the presidential election here in Nigeria. In truth, perhaps it's time for us to include an amendment in our constitution saying that, in addition to saying to win the presidency, you must score the highest number of votes in at least 2/3 of the federation, which is 24 states. Perhaps we need to add a further condition saying that for you to be elected president, there must be a cutoff point. After all, when we're gaining admission into universities here through the Joint Admissions and Matriculation Board, there is a cutoff point. If you don't score this, you can't go in and study law. If you don't score this number, you can't go in to study medicine. Maybe it's time for the Nigerian Constitution to also include, if you want to become president, you must score at least this number of votes. Whatever percentage we want to give it, I'm not sure, but we cannot have 93 million registered voters and the president is not scoring at least 10%. Perhaps it's time to put in a cutoff point now. Every president, in addition to having the highest number of votes cast in 2/3 of the states of the federation, that's 24 states and the Federal Capital Territory, that is including the Federal Capital Territory, perhaps we also need to say he must score at least a quarter of the votes cast, from registered number of voters. So if we have 93 million people, then a quarter of that must be the figure he's scoring. But I will leave that to mathematicians and, political scientists to decipher and to decide. But it is time for us to really pay attention to it. And maybe this cutoff point is just the thing we need. That way, we won't even have a proliferation of parties where votes are being split into all these smaller parties. You understand? So instead of 22 parties, maybe now we'll have like 10 parties and there will be more concentration of votes into those parties. But it is something that we really need to consider to make sure that the president's mandate is very strong and authentic.